America has always been a land of contradictions where soaring ideals of justice and freedom have sometimes collided with the darkest corners of human nature. Behind the polished facade of history textbooks, there's a shadowy underbelly of crimes so bizarre, so utterly inexplicable, they've left investigators scratching their heads and communities forever changed. Picture this, a nation built on dreams, yet haunted by mysteries that defy logic. From unsolved disappearances to heists pulled off with almost supernatural precision, these aren't just crimes. They're stories that blur the line between reality and something far stranger. What if I told you that some of these cases are so peculiar, they've been buried by time, overshadowed by more famous scandals? We're about to uncover 33 of the most shocking, mind-bending crimes in American history, each one stranger than the last. Think of a thief who left behind riddles instead of fingerprints, or a killer whose motives remain a puzzle decades later. These aren't just headlines, they're windows into a world where truth is often more unsettling than fiction. And the most chilling part, some of these mysteries remain unsolved, waiting for someone, maybe even you, to piece together the clues. So why do these stories still captivate us? Maybe it's the thrill of the unknown, or the way they force us to question how well we really understand the world around us. Whatever the reason, one thing's certain: by the time we're done, you'll never look at American history the same way again. Because hidden in the annals of crime are tales so bizarre, they challenge everything we think we know. Ready to step into the shadows, let's begin. In the quiet town of Villisca, Iowa, the morning of June 10, 1912 began like any other, until the unthinkable shattered the illusion of safety. Inside a modest white house on East 2nd Street, 8 people lay dead, their skulls crushed by an axe so violently that the weapon itself was left behind, propped against the wall like some macabre trophy. The victims, the entire Moore family, parents Josiah and Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 young girls spending the night as guests, not a single survivor. What made this crime even more chilling was the calculated cruelty. The killer had covered the bodies with sheets, as if tucking them in for eternity, and even left a plate of uneaten food on the kitchen table, frozen in time. The investigation spiraled into chaos. Suspects emerged like shadows, none more notorious than George Kelly, a traveling preacher with a volatile temper. Witnesses claimed he'd been acting strangely in town, even preaching a fire and brimstone sermon the night before the murders. But evidence was flimsy, and Kelly's alibis unraveled just as quickly as they formed. Then came the whispers of a jealous neighbor, a deranged farmhand, even rumors of a ritualistic killing. Decades passed, theories multiplied, but no one was ever convicted. To this day, the Villisca Axe Murders remain a wound that never healed. The house still stands, a magnet for paranormal investigators who swear they've heard children's laughter in empty rooms or felt the weight of unseen eyes. Was it a crime of passion, a random act of madness, or something far more sinister, left unsolved to torment the living? One thing's certain, the echoes of that night still haunt Villisca, a reminder that some doors once opened can never fully close. Long after the bloodstains faded from the Villisca house's floorboards, the whispers began. Locals swore the property was cursed, that on still summer nights you could hear the muffled sobs of Sarah Moore or the frantic pacing of the killer moving between bedrooms. By the 1970s, the abandoned home had become a magnet for thrill seekers and paranormal investigators, each hoping to capture proof that the victims never truly left. One team claimed their tape recorder picked up a child's voice pleading, "Don't hurt Mama," while others reported doors slamming shut on their own, their locks clicking as if guided by invisible hands. The current owners leaned into the law, offering overnight stays for the brave or foolish enough to face whatever lingered there. But the house isn't the only thing that refuses to let go. The murders rewrote Villisca's identity, transforming a sleepy farming town into shorthand for unspeakable horror. true crime authors dissected every rumor, from theories of a transient serial killer to dark suggestions of a local cover-up. Even the axe itself took on mythic status, disappearing for decades before resurfacing in the attic of a deceased suspect's relative. What makes this case endure isn't just the gruesome details, it's the unresolved questions that gnaw at our fascination with the unknown. Why were the mirrors covered? Who ate that last meal left on the table? And why, over a century later, does it feel like the truth is still hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone bold enough to pry loose its secrets? Villisca isn't just a crime scene, it's a mirror reflecting our deepest fears about the randomness of violence and the fragility of safety. The axe may have fallen in 1912, but the echoes, those are forever. Los Angeles in 1947 was a city of glittering dreams and dark secrets, a place where starlets arrived with hope and sometimes vanished without answers. But no disappearance would haunt the public imagination like that of Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress whose mutilated body was found in a vacant lot on January 15th. The press dubbed her the Black Dahlia, a name pulled from a noir film and her rumored preference for dark clothing. What followed wasn't just a murder investigation. It became a spectacle, a media circus that blurred the line between tragedy and tabloid obsession. The crime scene was a horror straight from a nightmare. Short's body had been severed at the waist, drained of blood, and posed with eerie precision. Her arms outstretched, her legs spread apart, her face slashed into a grotesque grin. The killer had scrubbed her skin clean, leaving no fingerprints, no traces. And then there were the letters, taunting notes sent to newspapers, one even including Short's personal belongings, as if the murderer was reveling in the chaos. The LAPD was overwhelmed. Tips poured in by the thousands, but leads evaporated. Suspects ranged from jealous suitors to wealthy socialites, even a doctor with surgical skills matching the brutality of the cuts. Yet with each dead end, the case grew colder. Why does the Black Dahlia endure? It's more than the savagery of the crime. It's the way the story laid bare the dark side of the American dream, a young woman chewed up by a city that promised fame but delivered infamy. The press painted Short as a femme fatale, a party girl twisting her life into a morality tale. In truth, she was a vulnerable young woman with fractured family ties, drifting through a world that saw her as disposable. Decades later, the files remain open, the theories wilder than ever. Was it a jealous lover, a serial killer testing his craft, or something even darker, hidden in the shadowy corners of old Hollywood power? The Dahlia's smile, frozen in death, seems to mock us still, a riddle written in blood, waiting for a solution that may never come. The Black Dahlia case didn't just haunt police files, it seeped into the bloodstream of American culture, twisting itself into books, films, and even the way we consume true crime today. Within months of Elizabeth Short's murder, the story had already morphed into something darker and more sensational than the facts alone. Tabloids fed the public a steady diet of exaggerated details, painting Short as both victim and vamp, a cautionary tale wrapped in scandal. By the time James Ellroy published his noir masterpiece, The Black Dahlia, in 1987, the line between reality and myth had blurred beyond recognition. His fictionalized account, later adapted into a film, didn't just borrow the case's chilling details, it amplified them, weaving conspiracy theories and Hollywood corruption into a narrative so gripping, it became impossible to separate fact from fiction. But Ellroy's work was just the beginning. The Dahlia story became a blueprint for how true crime could captivate audiences, inspiring everything from documentaries to podcasts obsessed with re-examining every grisly detail. Copycat theories flourished, with amateur sleuths claiming to uncover new evidence every few years, each theory wilder than the last. Some pointed to infamous killers like the Zodiac or the Cleveland torso murderer, while others spun elaborate tales of occult rituals tied to powerful Hollywood elites. The case even birthed a morbid tourism industry, with guided tours leading visitors through the shadowy corners of Los Angeles where Short's ghost was said to linger. What's most striking, though, is how the Dahlia case foreshadowed our modern obsession with unsolved mysteries. Before Serial or Making a Murderer, there was this, a crime so brutal, so enigmatic, it demanded endless reinterpretation. The media's handling of Short's death set a dangerous precedent, turning victims into characters and violence into entertainment. Yet it also forced us to confront uncomfortable questions. Why are we drawn to stories like this? Is it the puzzle, the horror, or something deeper? The fear that behind the glamour of our cities, darkness waits, patient and unseen. The Black Dahlia's legacy isn't just an unsolved murder. It's a mirror reflecting our fascination with the macabre, a reminder that some stories don't end with a verdict. They live on, evolving with each retelling, feeding our hunger for answers that may never come. And in that way, Elizabeth Short's tragedy became something else entirely, the birth of true crime as we know it. The Zodiac Killer didn't just murder his victims, he turned their deaths into a twisted game, taunting police and the public with cryptic puzzles and arrogant letters signed with his now infamous symbol. Between the late 1960s and early 1970s, this shadowy figure terrorized Northern California, leaving at least 5 confirmed dead and 2 survivors who carried the physical and psychological scars for life. But what made the Zodiac stand apart wasn't just the brutality of his crimes. It was the chilling way he weaponized fear, mailing coded messages to newspapers with boasts like, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." His first confirmed attack came on December 20th, 1968, when teenagers David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were shot to death in their car on a secluded lovers' lane near Vallejo. Months later, another couple, Darlene Ferrin and Mike Majow, were ambushed in a parked car. Ferrin died, but Majow miraculously survived, giving investigators their first and only glimpse of the killer. A heavy-set man in an executioner's hood, shining a flashlight before opening fire. Then came the letters pages filled with ciphers, some deciphered to reveal gloating threats, others still unsolved to this day. The most infamous, the 340-character cipher mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969, cracked only 51 years later to reveal the killer's haunting claim, "I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me." Suspects piled up over the decades, but one name loomed largest: Arthur Lee Allen, a former schoolteacher with a disturbing fascination with codes and firearms. Witnesses placed him near crime scenes, and his handwriting bore eerie similarities to the Zodiac's. Yet DNA evidence in the 2000s failed to link him definitively, leaving the case wide open. Why does the Zodiac still captivate us? Maybe it's the arrogance of his unsolved ciphers, the way he mocked authority and vanished into thin air. Or perhaps it's the fear he tapped into, the idea that evil could be hiding behind a cipher, a letter, or even a casual conversation. The Zodiac didn't just kill, he made the entire Bay Area question every stranger, every parked car, every unanswered phone call. And that's a legacy far more terrifying than any body count. The Zodiac ciphers weren't just taunts, they were battlegrounds where amateur cryptographers clashed with a killer's twisted intellect. Of the 4 codes he mailed to newspapers, only 2 have ever been fully deciphered, leaving the remaining 2 as maddening relics of his ego. The first, known as the 408 cipher, was cracked within a week by a high school teacher and his wife, revealing the Zodiac's chilling confession: "I like killing people because it is so much fun." But the others, they became obsessions, drawing in everyone from FBI cryptanalysts to basement hobbyists armed with frequency charts and desperation. The most infamous of these unsolved puzzles, the 340 cipher, sat untouched for 51 years, its symbols staring back at investigators like a smug smirk. Then, in 2020, a team of private citizens finally broke through, using brute force computing and a dash of intuition. The decoded message was hauntingly mundane: I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me." No clues, no confessions, just the killer's glee at the chaos he'd sown. But even this breakthrough came with controversy. Some experts argued the solution was incomplete, that hidden layers might still lurk beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the 13-symbol cipher, a short string of characters sent with a bloody piece of a victim's shirt, remains unbroken. Theories abound. Maybe it's a name, a location, or just another cruel joke. Over the decades, enthusiasts have proposed solutions ranging from anagrams to biblical references, but none have stuck. The Zodiac's final known cipher, a jumble of letters mailed in 1974, was dismissed by the FBI as gibberish, though a handful of diehards still believe it holds the key to his identity. What makes these codes endure isn't just their mystery, it's the way they democratize the hunt. In an age before crowdsourcing, the Zodiac turned crime solving into a public puzzle, inviting anyone with a pencil and patience to play. Online forums now teem with fresh attempts, each generation convinced they'll be the one to crack what experts couldn't. Yet the irony is thick. The more we obsess over his ciphers, the more we feed the very narcissism that drove him to write them. The Zodiac didn't just want to kill, he wanted an audience, a legacy, and in that, at least, he succeeded. Recent years have brought glimmers of hope. Advanced algorithms and global collaborations have revived cold cases before. Could the Zodiac's riddles be next, or are we chasing shadows, pouring modern tools into the mind of a madman who might have left us nothing but dead ends? One thing's certain, as long as those codes remain unsolved, the Zodiac's game isn't over. He's still out there in the gaps between symbols, laughing. On Christmas Eve, 1945, while most of America slept wrapped in holiday warmth, a fire tore through the Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. A blaze so hot, authorities claimed, it reduced 5 children to nothing but ash. But here's the chilling twist. No bones were ever found, not a single tooth, not a trace of the remains that should have survived even the fiercest flames. For George and Jenny Sodder, the parents who lost 5 of their 10 children that night, the official explanation, a tragic accident caused by faulty wiring, wasn't just inadequate. It was an insult. What followed wasn't grief, it was a 40-year crusade to prove their kids had been stolen, not burned. The inconsistencies piled up like kindling. Witnesses reported seeing men lurking near the house that night, and a neighbor swore she spotted the children being herded into a dark car as flames engulfed the home. The Sodders' phone line, mysteriously cut before the fire, couldn't summon help. Even the fire itself behaved strangely, burning with unnatural intensity yet leaving nearby trees unscathed. When investigators sifted through the rubble, they found a single, unexplainable artifact, a hard, greenish lump that resembled melted metal, not human remains. George Sodder, a coal miner with no formal education, became an amateur detective overnight. He printed thousands of flyers with his children's faces, offering rewards for tips, and even hired a private investigator who uncovered whispers of a kidnapping plot tied to the family's outspoken criticism of organized crime. Rumor had it George had angered local mafia figures by openly opposing Mussolini's fascist regime, a dangerous stance in a community with deep Italian-American ties. Could the fire have been a cover for retaliation? The family's desperation bled into the surreal. In the 1960s, a blurry photo arrived in the mail, a postcard of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to one of the missing Sodder boys. The caption read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, ill boys, a 90,132 or 35. Was it a hoax or a coded cry for help? The Sodders chased every lead, from circus performers who claimed to have seen the children to psychic visions pointing to secret adoptions. But with each dead end, the mystery only deepened. Why does this case still grip us? Maybe it's the parents' refusal to accept the unacceptable, a defiance that turned them into folk heroes of sorts. Or perhaps it's the gnawing possibility that 5 children didn't die that night, but were instead thrust into lives they never chose. The Sodder house fire wasn't just a tragedy, it was a rift in reality, a glimpse into a world where official stories crumble under scrutiny, and the truth might be far stranger than anyone dared imagine. Decades later, the land where the house stood remains empty, a silent monument to questions that outlived everyone who asked them. The Sodder parents died without answers, but their determination etched one certainty into history: some fires don't just destroy. They obscure, and whatever really happened that Christmas Eve, the smoke hasn't cleared yet. The Sodder mystery didn't fade with time. It evolved, fueled by modern technology and relentless public fascination. In the 2000s, as DNA analysis leaped forward, renewed efforts emerged to crack the case wide open. Descendants of the Sodder family partnered with forensic experts, exhuming old evidence and even scouring databases for genetic matches that might link to the missing children. The greenish lump found in the ashes, once dismissed as melted wiring, was re-examined, with some theorists proposing it could have been a chemical accelerant hinting at arson. Yet, despite these advances, the results remained frustratingly inconclusive. Then came the ground-penetrating radar. In 2015, researchers scanned the site where the Sodder house once stood, searching for signs of buried remains the original investigators might have missed. The findings: nothing, no bone fragments, no traces of human DNA, just more silence where answers should have been. This absence only deepened the enigma. If the children had perished in the fire, where were their remains? And if they hadn't, where had they gone? Theories have spiraled into the realm of the extraordinary. Some speculate the children were trafficked, their identities erased by a network exploiting post-war chaos. Others point to rumors of witness testimonies, decades-old whispers of children seen in orphanages or even abroad, living under new names, the most haunting possibility. That they were taken as part of a vendetta, their lives were written to punish George Sodder for his political defiance. What keeps this case alive isn't just the lack of closure, it's the way it challenges our trust in the systems meant to protect us. The Sodder fire wasn't just a tragedy, it was a forensic anomaly that exposed the gaps between official narratives and the messy, unresolved truths they can't contain. Today, online sleuths dissect every scrap of evidence, from the cryptic postcard to the odd behavior of the fire itself, while documentaries and podcasts breathe new life into the family's quest. Perhaps the most poignant twist is this: the Sodders' relentless pursuit turned their private grief into a public reckoning, forcing us to confront how easily the vulnerable can vanish without a trace. In an age of satellites and DNA, their story remains a stubborn reminder: some mysteries refuse to stay buried, no matter how much time passes. And until every stone is unturned, the question lingers: were 5 children lost to fire, or something far more sinister? The search isn't over, it's just waiting for the right clue. At the dawn of the modern age, as Chicago prepared to dazzle the world with the 1893 World's Fair, a different kind of spectacle was unfolding in plain sight, one draped in shadows. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H. Holmes, wasn't just a murderer. He was an architect of nightmares, crafting a labyrinth of horrors disguised as a hotel. The building locals called the Murder Castle stood 3 stories tall, its ordinary brick facade hiding trapdoors, soundproof rooms, and even a hidden crematorium. Holmes designed every inch of it with a single purpose: to lure guests in and ensure they never left. The castle's blueprints read like something from a horror novel. Secret passages connected rooms where victims could be observed through peepholes. Gas lines pumped poison into sealed chambers, and chutes led directly to the basement, where surgical tables waited beside vats of acid and quicklime. Holmes posed as a charming doctor and businessman, preying on young women drawn to the city by the fair's promise of opportunity. He'd hire them as clerks or stenographers, then vanish them without a trace, often after forging life insurance policies in their names. The sheer audacity of his crimes defied belief. While police searched for missing persons, Holmes was dismantling bodies in his own private slaughterhouse, selling skeletons to medical schools as specimens. His downfall came not from the castle's horrors, but from something simpler: greed. A botched insurance scam in Philadelphia led to his arrest in 1894. Once in custody, detectives unraveled his web of aliases and fraud, eventually connecting him to dozens of disappearances. Under pressure, Holmes confessed to 27 murders, though experts now believe the true number could surpass 200. Even his final moments were steeped in macabre spectacle. Before his hanging in 1896, he demanded his coffin be filled with cement and buried 10 feet deep, terrified his body would be stolen for dissection. What makes Holmes' story endure isn't just the brutality, it's the way he weaponized trust. In an era before criminal profiling, he exploited the anonymity of urban life, turning progress itself into a tool for predation. The murder castle became a symbol of something deeply unsettling. Evil doesn't always lurk in alleys. Sometimes it waits behind a polished front desk, smiling, holding a leash. Modern forensic teams later sifted through the castle's ruins. After a suspicious fire destroyed it, finding human remains fused into the foundation. But perhaps the most haunting legacy is this: Holmes didn't just kill individuals. He killed certainty, proving monsters could build their lairs in broad daylight, right under society's nose. And that's a revelation far more terrifying than any ghost story. H.H. Holmes didn't just commit crimes, he scripted them, weaving a narrative so ghastly it became the blueprint for modern horror. Long before true crime podcasts or serial killer documentaries, his murder castle planted seeds in the public imagination that grew into entire genres. Take The Devil in the White City, Erik Larson's best-selling book that juxtaposed Holmes' horrors with the glittering World's Fair. It wasn't just history, it was a template for storytelling. The charming monster hiding in society's spotlight, a trope that echoes through everything from Hannibal Lecter to American Horror Story. Holmes' legacy isn't just in body counts, it's in how he taught us to fear the ordinary, that unassuming hotel. It's the predecessor to every haunted house with a dark secret, every innocuous small town hiding a dungeon. Criminal psychology owes him a grim debt too. Holmes was one of the first killers to weaponize charisma, proving evil could wear a tailored suit and a smile. Profilers now study his methods, the way he exploited trust, the meticulous record-keeping of his crimes as early examples of psychopathic behavior. His ability to blend in, to manipulate systems meant to protect people, foreshadowed the Ted Bundys and John Wayne Gacy's who followed. Even his confessions were performative, a mix of bravado and lies that kept authorities guessing. Modern forensic science might have caught him faster, but his playbook, gaslighting, aliases, playing the victim, still reads like a masterclass in deception. But perhaps his most enduring impact is the way he forced us to confront a terrifying idea. Monsters aren't born in shadows, they build, they network. They turn everyday spaces into traps. The murder castle wasn't just a crime scene. It was a metaphor for the darkness lurking behind progress, a theme that still fuels our fascination with true crime. Every time we binge a documentary or dissect a cold case, we're walking Holmes' hallways, testing the doors, wondering which ones might be locked from the inside. His story isn't just history. It's a warning written in blood and blueprints that the most frightening monsters are the ones who know how to hide in plain sight. Charles Lindbergh wasn't just a hero, he was a symbol of American ingenuity, the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic. But in 1932, his greatest triumph was overshadowed by an unthinkable crime. On the night of March 1st, someone climbed a makeshift ladder into the nursery of his New Jersey home and snatched his 20-month-old son, Charles Jr., leaving behind only a ransom note demanding $50,000. What followed wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a media frenzy, a nationwide manhunt, and a trial that would forever change how America viewed justice. The ransom notes kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. Lindbergh, desperate and grieving, paid the money through a shadowy intermediary, but the child was never returned. Weeks later, a trucker stumbled upon the boy's decomposed body in the woods just miles from the Lindbergh estate. The cause of death, a brutal skull fracture, likely from the kidnapper's ladder collapsing during the escape. The public outcry was instant and volcanic. This wasn't just a crime against a family, it was an attack on the American dream itself. Enter Bruno Hauptmann, a German immigrant carpenter with a criminal record back home. When police tracked marked ransom bills to his Bronx apartment 2 years later, the case seemed closed. Hauptmann insisted he was innocent, that the money had been left with him by a friend who'd since died. But the evidence was damning. A plank in his attic matched the ladder's wood. His handwriting bore eerie similarities to the ransom notes, and witnesses placed him near the Lindbergh estate the night of the kidnapping. The trial was a circus, with reporters crammed into every corner and Lindbergh himself testifying against Hauptmann. The jury took just 11 hours to deliver a guilty verdict. But here's where the story twists. Decades later, forensic experts re-examined the case and found troubling gaps. The wood match inconclusive at best. The handwriting analysis subjective. Even the ladder's construction seemed too sloppy for a skilled carpenter like Hauptmann. Some theorized the real culprit was a member of Lindbergh's inner circle, a disgruntled servant or even a relative capitalizing on the chaos. Others point to organized crime, noting Lindbergh's strange dealings with bootleggers during ransom negotiations. What makes this case endure isn't just the tragedy, it's the doubt. Hauptmann went to the electric chair proclaiming his innocence, and today his execution feels less like justice and more like a nation desperate for closure. The Lindbergh kidnapping didn't just change laws. It sparked the federal kidnapping statute known as the Lindbergh Law. It exposed how easily public outrage can eclipse truth. And that's a lesson that still echoes in courtrooms today. Was Hauptmann guilty? The system said yes, but the whispers, they've never quite stopped. Before the Lindbergh kidnapping was considered a state crime, a local matter with wildly uneven punishments. But the national outrage over this case forced lawmakers to act. In June 1932, just 3 months after the crime, Congress passed the Federal Kidnapping Act, commonly called the Lindbergh Law. For the first time in U.S. history, crossing state lines with a victim made kidnapping a federal offense, punishable by death if the victim wasn't returned unharmed. This wasn't just legal tweaking, it was a seismic shift in how America tackled crime, laying the groundwork for modern FBI involvement in major cases. The law's ripple effects transformed forensic science too. The Lindbergh investigation became a laboratory for new techniques, some brilliant, others disastrous. Handwriting analysis took center stage during Hauptmann's trial, with experts dissecting every loop and slant in the ransom notes, a practice now standard in criminal cases. But the investigation also exposed dangerous flaws. The ladder used in the kidnapping was mishandled by dozens of officers, its critical fingerprints smudged by overeager detectives. This chaos spurred stricter evidence protocols, eventually leading to the clean room standards we see in crime labs today. Even the ransom money tracing, where serial numbers were meticulously recorded, set precedents for tracking illicit funds. Yet the law's legacy is complicated. While it deterred copycat kidnappings, its harsh penalties had unintended consequences. Some criminals, knowing they'd face execution if caught, chose to kill their victims rather than leave witnesses. The Lindbergh Law also amplified federal power in ways that worried civil libertarians, blurring the line between state and federal jurisdiction. Decades later, this tension would resurface in cases like the Patty Hearst abduction, where federal involvement both helped and hindered the investigation. Perhaps the most lasting impact was psychological. The Lindbergh case taught America that crime could be national news, that fear could unite a country, and that justice systems needed to evolve faster than criminals. Today, when Amber Alerts light up phones or the FBI joins a manhunt, we're seeing the echoes of that March night in 1932. The law didn't just change statutes, it changed how we think about safety, forever binding personal tragedy to public policy in the fight against the unthinkable. New Orleans in 1918 should have been a city celebrating. World War I had ended, jazz was erupting from every speakeasy, and the French Quarter pulsed with life. But beneath the music and revelry, something far darker was stalking the streets. A figure locals called the Axeman targeted Italian immigrant families, striking in the dead of night. His method was as brutal as it was precise, prying open doors with a chisel, then swinging an axe or straight razor at anyone unlucky enough to wake during his attacks. By the time his reign of terror ended, at least 6 people lay dead and countless others bore scars, both physical and psychological. Then came the letter. On March 13, 1919, the New Orleans Times-Picayune published a note signed by the killer himself, dripping with taunting bravado. "Hellishly yours, the Axeman," it began, before declaring that he'd spare anyone playing jazz music the following Tuesday night. "I am very fond of jazz," he wrote, as if murder were a game and his victims merely players in some macabre orchestra. The city reacted with equal parts panic and perverse compliance. That Tuesday, jazz blasted from nearly every home, dance hall, and street corner, a surreal night where music became both shield and survival tactic. But who was the Axeman? Theories range from a deranged butcher to a mafia hitman exploiting anti-Italian sentiment. Some victims survived their attacks long enough to describe a hulking figure, though details varied wildly. One survivor, a grocer named Joseph Romano, insisted his assailant wore a dark coat and a funny little hat, while others swore the man had glowing eyes. The police, overwhelmed and underfunded, made little progress. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, the killing stopped. No confession, no arrest, just silence. The case's enduring mystery lies in its contradictions. Why did he target Italians? Was the jazz letter a genuine quirk or a calculated distraction? And most haunting of all, did he vanish or simply blend back into the city's shadows? New Orleans, a place built on legends, added one more to its lore, a killer who turned fear into a melody, then walked away before the last note played. The Axeman didn't just leave bodies in his wake, he carved his way into the cultural DNA of New Orleans, twisting fear into art. Within months of his reign, jazz musicians immortalized him in song, with the Axeman's jazz becoming a macabre anthem of survival. The killer's own words, "I am very fond of jazz," transformed from a taunt into a bizarre muse. Clubs embraced the notoriety, advertising Axeman's safe nights where bands played non-stop, turning his morbid demand into a marketing gimmick. Even decades later, artists like Dr. John and Screamin' Jay Hawkins would riff on the legend, blending the supernatural with the swinging rhythms of the city. The Axeman's letter didn't just save lives that one Tuesday night. It fused crime and creativity in a way only New Orleans could, but jazz was just the beginning. The Axeman slithered into Southern folklore, becoming a boogeyman for the modern age. Parents warned disobedient children he'd return if they stayed up too late. Writers like Robert Tallant wove him into collections of Louisiana ghost stories, blurring the line between fact and campfire tale. Even the timing of his attacks fed the mythos, striking during Lent, when the city teetered between piety and indulgence, as if he were some demon punishing the sinful. Horror filmmakers latched onto the imagery, with the killer's signature tools, the axe, the chisel, echoing in slasher flicks decades later. Yet the darkest legacy lies in the unanswered questions. The Axeman's victims were almost entirely Italian immigrants, a detail that fuels theories about vendettas or even organized crime. Some historians suggest the killings were covered up by corrupt officials, their files lost in a precinct basement. Others wonder if the Axeman was never one man at all, but a series of unrelated crimes stitched together by panic. Whatever the truth, his story endures because it taps into something primal. The fear that chaos can wear a human face, that even in a city throbbing with life, death might be listening to the same music. Today, you can still hear whispers of the Axeman in the French Quarter, where tour guides spin his tale for wide-eyed visitors. But the real monument isn't in some haunted house, it's in the way New Orleans, a city that dances on graves, turned terror into a riff, a rhythm, a punchline. The Axeman wanted to be remembered. In the end, he got his wish not as a monster, but as a note in the song the city never stops singing. Madison Square Garden was supposed to be a temple of high society, a glittering rooftop theater where New York's elite gathered to see operas and bask in their own privilege. But on the evening of June 25, 1906, the architect who designed it, Stanford White, became the star of a very different kind of spectacle. As the audience laughed at a musical comedy called Mam'selle Champagne, millionaire Harry Thor strode across the room, drew a revolver, and shot White point blank in the face. The gunfire echoed through the theater, but what really stunned the nation wasn't the murder itself. It was the sordid love triangle that unraveled in courtrooms and newspapers for years afterward. At the center of it all stood Evelyn Nesbit, a chorus girl whose beauty had captivated both men. White, a 52-year-old architectural titan, had discovered her when she was just 16, showering her with jewels and champagne while allegedly drugging and assaulting her in a secret apartment he called his orgy room. Thor, a volatile Pittsburgh heir obsessed with Nesbit, married her despite her past, then spent years seething over White's influence. The trial that followed was less about justice and more about voyeurism, with Nesbit forced to relive her trauma on the witness stand while tabloids dubbed her the girl in the red velvet swing, referencing a notorious rumor about her and White. Thor's defense was as shocking as the crime itself. His lawyers argued he'd been driven to insanity by White's corruption of his wife, coining the term dementia americana to describe a husband's righteous fury. The strategy worked, sort of. Thor was found not guilty by reason of insanity, only to escape custody years later and flee to Canada. Meanwhile, White's legacy crumbled. The man who designed Washington Square Arch and countless Gilded Age mansions was posthumously reduced to a predator, his brilliance overshadowed by scandal. What makes this case endure isn't just the violence, it's the way it exposed the rot beneath high society's gilded surface. The trial became a referendum on power, gender, and privilege, with Nesbit vilified as both victim and seductress. Reporters salivated over every lurid detail, proving public hunger for true crime long before the term existed. And threaded through it all was a question that still resonates. When wealth and fame collide with justice, who really pays the price? White's murder wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a seismic crack in the facade of American decorum, proving even the grandest facades can't hide the darkest secrets. The velvet curtains of Madison Square Garden may have closed on his life, but the drama he left behind, that's still playing to a packed house. The insanity defense Harry Thor's lawyers concocted wasn't just a legal strategy, it was a masterclass in manipulation, bending the public's moral outrage to their will. They argued Thor had suffered a temporary fit of dementia americana, a fabricated condition they described as a righteous fury any red-blooded husband might feel defending his wife's honor. Never mind that Evelyn Nesbit had been assaulted years before their marriage, or that Thor's own history of violent outbursts suggested deeper instability. The courtroom became a stage where wealth and privilege rewrote reality, with Thor's legal team painting White as a monstrous seducer who'd driven a noble man to madness. The jury ate it up. In an era when women's reputations were currency, the defense weaponized Nesbit's trauma to exonerate her abuser's killer, a twisted irony that laid bare the era's hypocrisy. Meanwhile, the press turned the trial into a three-ring circus. Reporters crammed into every inch of the courtroom, scribbling salacious details that would later be splashed across front pages from New York to San Francisco. Nesbit, just 22 years old, was forced to relive her assault in graphic detail, while artists sketched her trembling hands and downcast eyes for mass consumption. Tabloids dubbed her the girl in the red velvet swing, reducing her to a titillating caricature. Even the judge fed the frenzy, allowing testimony about White's alleged orgy room, complete with a mirrored ceiling and a swing suspended from the rafters, details that had little to do with the murder but everything to do with selling newspapers. Beneath the spectacle, though, the trial exposed the rot festering in Gilded Age high society. White's murder wasn't just a crime of passion, it was a flare illuminating how power operated behind closed doors. The same elite circles that celebrated White's architectural genius turned a blind eye to his predation, while Thor's fortune bought him a defense that would have been unthinkable for a working-class defendant. When the verdict came not guilty by reason of insanity, it wasn't justice, it was proof that in America the right connections could bend even the law to your will. Thor's eventual escape from an asylum only underscored the absurdity. Declared cured after a few years, he fled to Canada, where he bragged about the murder in interviews. Meanwhile, Nesbit, stripped of both dignity and financial security, spiraled into poverty and addiction. The real insanity wasn't Thor's momentary rage, it was a system that let rich men play by different rules, leaving everyone else to clean up the mess. And the media, they moved on to the next scandal, forever hungry for a story that could sell as well as this one, because in the end, the trial wasn't about truth. It was about who could tell the most compelling story, and in Gilded Age America, money always had the loudest voice. The Bender family's inn seemed like a godsend to weary travelers crossing the Kansas prairie in the 1870s. A humble log cabin offering hot meals and a place to rest along the lonely Osage Trail. But beneath its weathered planks lurked a secret no passerby could have guessed. The Benders weren't just hospitable farmers, they were a family of killers who turned their home into a slaughterhouse. Their method was chillingly simple. Guests would be seated at the dinner table with their backs to a canvas curtain dividing the room. Then, as they ate, one of the Benders would strike from behind with a hammer, crushing their skulls before dragging the bodies through a trapdoor to the cellar below. There, the victims were robbed, stripped, and buried in the orchard out back. Some were even slit open at the abdomen, their blood funneled into a hidden trough, a detail so gruesome, locals later dubbed the place Hell's Half-Acre. For years, the Benders operated with terrifying efficiency. Neighbors grew suspicious as travelers began vanishing near the property, but the family played the part of pious settlers flawlessly. Ma Bender posed as a faith healer, her son John a quiet farmer, while daughter Kate dazzled visitors with psychic readings and flirtatious charm. It wasn't until 1873, when a local doctor named William York disappeared while searching for his missing brother, that the pieces began to fit. A posse stormed the inn, finding blood-stained floors, a stash of stolen belongings, and freshly turned earth in the orchard. 8 bodies were exhumed, though rumors suggested there could have been dozens more. But here's where the mystery deepens. By the time the law arrived in force, the Benders had vanished. Some claimed they'd fled to Texas or Mexico, while others whispered they'd been lynched by vigilantes before authorities could intervene. A woman matching Kate's description later surfaced in New York, allegedly working as a fortune teller under a new name, while unconfirmed sightings of the others cropped up for decades. The most haunting theory, that they'd never left Kansas at all, that their bodies lay in unmarked graves, victims of their own bloody legacy. This wasn't just America's first known serial killer family, it was a blueprint for how easily evil could hide in plain sight. The Benders exploited trust, the isolation of the frontier, and the desperation of those seeking refuge. Their crimes forced a reckoning with the darker side of westward expansion, where the promise of a warm meal could be the last thing a traveler ever tasted. To this day, no one knows how many they killed or where they ended up. But one thing's certain, beneath the quiet fields of Labette County, the earth still holds secrets it refuses to give up. The Benders' reign of terror didn't just end with their disappearance. It became fuel for the American imagination, twisting fact into folklore so potent it still haunts pop culture today. Almost overnight, their crimes morphed into campfire tales, whispered warnings about the dangers lurking beyond the frontier's edge. Newspapers of the era sensationalized the family as demonic figures, painting Kansas as a land where civilization thinned into savagery. Their story tapped into a deeper anxiety that in the vast, untamed West, monsters didn't hide in shadows, they served you supper. This fear found its way into America's storytelling DNA. The Benders' signature brutality, the hammer blows, the trapdoor, the blood-soaked orchard echoes in horror classics like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Leatherface's family, with their isolated farmhouse and butchery tools, feels like a direct descendant of the Benders' nightmare logic. Even the trope of the charming killer, luring victims with false hospitality, traces back to Kate Bender's psychic parlor tricks and her mother's fake piety. Real life provided the blueprint, and filmmakers ran with it, swapping prairie dresses for chainsaws but keeping the same primal terror. Trust the wrong stranger, and you might never leave the dinner table. Yet the Benders myth isn't just about gore, it's about ambiguity. Unlike most Wild West outlaws whose fates were documented in wanted posters or hangman's ledgers, the family vanished without a trace. That unresolved ending left room for speculation to run wild. Some claimed Kate resurfaced as a notorious New York medium, using her old tricks to scam high society clients. Others insisted vigilantes caught the family on the run, burying them in unmarked graves to spare the state the spectacle of a trial. The lack of closure made their legend malleable, a blank space where each generation could project its own fears. Even the location of Hell's Half Acre became contested. Over time, the actual cabin site was plowed under, its exact coordinates lost. Treasure hunters dug up the orchard for decades, convinced the Benders had buried gold alongside their victims. The more the physical evidence faded, the larger the story grew. Proof that sometimes the most enduring horrors aren't the ones we can see, but the ones we're left to imagine. What makes the Benders stick isn't just their violence, it's how their tale holds a mirror to American contradictions. They were immigrants who exploited other pioneers, settlers who perverted the dream of homesteading into something monstrous. Their legend thrives because it forces us to ask, was the frontier a land of opportunity or a hunting ground where only the ruthless survived? The answer, like the Benders themselves, remains just out of reach, hiding somewhere between history and campfire shadow. And that's where the real terror lies, not in the axe or the trapdoor, but in the uneasy thought that maybe, just maybe, they got away with it. Erie, Pennsylvania, seemed like the last place you'd expect a real-life thriller to unfold until August 28, 2003. When a pizza delivery man named Brian Wells walked into a PNC bank with a bomb locked around his neck and a note demanding $250,000. The security footage from that day shows Wells, a 50-something man with a resigned expression, handing the teller a bizarre typed letter that read like a scavenger hunt from hell. It instructed him to collect the cash, then follow a series of timed clues to unlock the device before it detonated. What nobody knew at that moment was that Wells wasn't just a robber, he was a pawn in a scheme so twisted, it would leave investigators questioning everything they thought they knew about coercion and survival. The bomb squad arrived within minutes, but the device was unlike anything they'd encountered. Rigged with a complex locking mechanism and visible countdown timer, it wasn't just a threat, it was a psychological weapon designed to force Wells into playing along until the very end. As law enforcement scrambled to negotiate, the timer kept ticking. Then, with a deafening blast, the bomb exploded, killing Wells in a scene so horrific, it seared itself into the memories of everyone who witnessed it. The FBI initially treated the case as a botched robbery, painting Wells as a willing participant. But when a local sex worker named Marjorie Deal Armstrong entered the picture, the story took a turn straight out of a crime novel. Diehl Armstrong, a diagnosed schizophrenic with a history of violence, had recruited Wells as part of an elaborate plot to fund a hitman and silence a witness in another case. Alongside her accomplice, a petty criminal named Kenneth Barnes, she'd constructed the collar bomb in a garage, testing it on mannequins before strapping it to Wells. The plan: if he succeeded, they'd split the money. If he failed, well, the bomb ensured he'd never talk. Investigators later uncovered a trail of receipts, blueprints, and witness testimonies that painted Diehl Armstrong as the mastermind, a woman so calculating she'd allegedly murdered her own boyfriend years earlier to collect his life insurance. Yet the real tragedy lies in the FBI's missteps. For years, they fixated on Wells's possible involvement, wasting precious time while Diehl Armstrong and Barnes slipped through the cracks. It wasn't until 2007, after a local journalist's dogged reporting, that the full scope of the conspiracy came to light. By then, Diehl Armstrong was already in prison for an unrelated murder, where she'd later die of cancer before facing trial for the collar bomb scheme. Barnes, meanwhile, cut a plea deal, leaving lingering questions about whether justice was truly served. What lingers isn't just the horror of Wells's final moments, it's the chilling realization that ordinary people can become puppets in someone else's deranged game. The collar bomb heist wasn't just a crime, it was a spectacle of human cruelty, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with a scream. Sometimes it comes with a ticking sound and a smile. And for Brian Wells, the only choice was between a bank vault and a bomb, neither of which offered a way out. The bizarre collar bomb heist didn't just shock investigators, it echoed through Hollywood, blurring the line between real-life crime and cinematic spectacle. When the dark comedy 30 Minutes or Less hit theaters in 2011, critics were quick to spot the parallels. The film starred Jesse Eisenberg as a pizza delivery guy forced to rob a bank with a bomb strapped to his chest, a premise so eerily similar to Brian Wells's ordeal that survivors of the actual case called it tasteless exploitation. But what made the comparison even more unsettling was the timing. The movie's script had been written before Wells's death, based instead on a 1982 incident where a failing entrepreneur named Brian Douglas Wells, no relation, hired hitmen to strap a bomb to a different pizza delivery driver. Life, it seemed, had imitated art imitating life in a grim, endless loop. The ethical firestorm that followed revealed just how uncomfortably entertainment and tragedy can collide. Diehl Armstrong's defense team even tried using the movie as evidence, arguing the real plot was too outlandish to be believable, as if Hollywood's version somehow diluted the horror of what happened in Eerie. But the deeper issue wasn't just about sensitivity, it was about how we process real suffering when it's repackaged as popcorn thrills. 30 Minutes or Less played the scenario for laughs, complete with slapstick chases and quippy one-liners, while the real Wells died begging police to help him as the timer ticked down. The dissonance forced audiences to ask, when does inspiration become appropriation, and who gets to decide where the line is drawn? Yet the film's existence also underscored something darker about the heist itself, how easily absurdity can mask brutality. The collar bomb plot was cinematic in the worst way. Its mix of meticulous planning and chaotic execution felt ripped from a Coen brothers script, complete with bumbling accomplices and a macabre punchline. That's why the case still haunts. It exists in the uncanny valley between reality and fiction, too strange to believe yet too real to dismiss. Even now, true crime documentaries wrestling with the story face the same tightrope walk: how to honor the victim's terror without amplifying the killer's notoriety. Perhaps the most unsettling parallel isn't between Wells and Eisenberg's character, but between Diehl Armstrong and the trope of the crazy genius villain. Her manipulative brilliance, her ability to bend others to her will, it's a narrative we've seen 100 times on screen, from Gone Girl to The Joker. But life doesn't have tidy third acts or dramatic music cues. In reality, she died in prison, her motives still muddy, her full role in the scheme never fully unpacked. The movies tidy up chaos. The eerie case reminds us that some stories refuse to fit into neat genres. And that's where the real horror lies, not in the bomb's explosion, but in the silence that follows when the credits roll and the questions remain. Chicago in September 1982 was a city gripped by an invisible terror. It started with 12-year-old Mary Kellerman, who woke up with a sore throat and took an extra-strength Tylenol capsule. Within hours, she was dead. That same morning, postal worker Adam Janus collapsed after swallowing the same medication, followed by his grieving brother and sister-in-law, who took pills from the same bottle after gathering at his house. By week's end, 7 people would perish, each killed by cyanide secretly packed into seemingly normal pain relievers. Panic spread faster than the news. Hospitals overflowed with people fearing they'd been poisoned. Grocery stores yanked every bottle off shelves, and police scrambled to find a killer who'd weaponized America's trust in everyday medicine. The crime scene was everywhere and nowhere. Unlike a shooting or stabbing, these murders left no fingerprints, no footprints, just empty medicine bottles scattered across different Chicago suburbs. Investigators realized the poisonings weren't factory mishaps but deliberate acts. Someone had methodically opened tamper-prone packaging, laced capsules with enough cyanide to kill within minutes, then slipped them back onto drugstore shelves. The randomness was the point. The killer wasn't targeting individuals, they were attacking the very idea of safety, turning suburban medicine cabinets into Russian roulette chambers. FBI profilers theorized the perpetrator was highly intelligent, possibly with a chemistry background, and driven by a warped desire for control or notoriety. Yet despite one of the largest investigations in history, no suspect was ever charged. In the absence of answers, the case reshaped America in ways the killer never intended. Within months, Congress passed laws mandating tamper-proof seals on over-the-counter medications, those foil wrappers and cotton balls you still find in pill bottles today. The pharmaceutical industry revolutionized packaging almost overnight, introducing safety features that became global standards. But the legacy wasn't just practical, it was psychological. For the first time, Americans questioned the sanctity of products they'd once trusted blindly. The Tylenol murders didn't just kill 7 people, they murdered naivety itself, leaving a nation forever checking seals and expiration dates. Who was behind it? Theories range from a disgruntled employee to infamous suspects like James Lewis, who penned a bizarre extortion letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding money to stop the killing. Though convicted for the letter scheme, Lewis was never tied to the actual poisonings. Others point to Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who lived in Chicago at the time and shared the killer's meticulous, impersonal cruelty. Decades later, advances in forensic chemistry rekindled hope. Residues on bottles might hold clues, but the trail remains cold. What lingers isn't just the mystery, but the chilling efficiency of the crime. The Tylenol killer proved how easily chaos could be mass-produced, how a single act of malice could rewrite societal norms. They vanished into the crowd, leaving behind a world where every popped pill cap carries an echo of that autumn's fear. 7 graves, countless broken seals, and a question mark that may never fade. The Tylenol poisonings didn't just rewrite the rules, they forced an entire industry to reinvent how products reach consumers. Within weeks of the Chicago deaths, Johnson & Johnson launched a historic recall, pulling 31 million bottles off shelves at a cost of over $100 million. But the real revolution came next. By 1983, the FDA had enacted sweeping regulations requiring tamper-evident packaging for over-the-counter medications, a seismic shift in consumer safety. Suddenly, those foil seals under bottle caps and shrink-wrapped boxes weren't just marketing, they were mandatory armor against human malice. Companies raced to innovate, introducing blister packs that made pills individually visible and safety seals that shattered if broken, turning every medicine cabinet into a fortress. This wasn't just about Tylenol. The ripple effects transformed everything from baby food to soda cans. manufacturers realized trust was no longer enough. They needed verifiable proof a product hadn't been compromised. The era of casually twisting open a bottle and popping pills vanished overnight, replaced by a new normal of peeling, poking, and inspecting. Even the psychology of shopping changed. Consumers, once passive, became hyper-vigilant detectives, scrutinizing packaging for the slightest tear or wrinkle. Lawsuits and liability fears pushed companies to adopt even stricter measures, like lot codes tracking every batch from factory to shelf. The Tylenol killer had unwittingly birthed an entire discipline of defensive design, yet the most profound impact was invisible: the death of blind trust. Before 1982, no one questioned whether their aspirin could kill them. The poisonings exposed a chilling truth: safety wasn't guaranteed by corporate goodwill alone. It required systems, checks, and layers of deterrence. Today, when you hear that crisp pop of a seal breaking, you're hearing the echo of those 7 deaths. The regulations didn't just protect us, they taught us to demand proof, to never take safety at face value again. But here's the haunting paradox: for all the progress, the killer's identity remains a gaping wound in the case. The new laws made copycats harder, yet they couldn't erase the original crime's randomness. Those blueprints for safety were written in blood, a reminder that sometimes progress comes not from solving mysteries, but from rendering them impossible to repeat. The Tylenol murders didn't just change packaging, they changed how America thinks about risk, turning every unbroken seal into a silent promise: this one's safe. For now, the Dutch colonial house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, seemed like the perfect home for the Lutz family until the whispers began. What started as a dream purchase in December 1975 quickly unraveled into a nightmare that would spawn books, movies, and decades of debate. Just 13 months before the Lutzes moved in, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. had stormed through those same halls with a rifle, murdering his parents and 4 siblings as they slept. The DeFeo massacre was horrifying enough, but what the Lutzes claimed next would eclipse even those gruesome details. They insisted the house itself was alive with malice: slamming doors, phantom footsteps, a demonic pig-like creature named Jody haunting the windows. Their 28-day stay ended in terrified flight, launching one of America's most infamous paranormal controversies. Skeptics wasted no time picking apart the Lutzes' story. Investigators noted glaring inconsistencies, like their claim of a hidden red room in the basement that no construction record supported. Paranormal researchers pointed out the family's financial troubles and the lucrative book deal signed just weeks after fleeing. Even the Catholic priest who supposedly blessed the house admitted his holy water had inexplicably boiled away, only to later confess he might have imagined it. The Lutzes' own lawyer, William Weber, eventually revealed he'd helped fabricate the haunting with them, calling it a hoax, a money-making scheme during a bitter fallout. Yet for all the debunking, the legend refused to die. Hollywood smelled blood in the water. The 1977 book The Amityville Horror became a bestseller, followed 2 years later by a blockbuster film starring James Brolin and Margaret Kidder. The movie cranked every eerie claim to 11 walls bleeding, demonic voices hissing, "Get out," solidifying the house's reputation as ground zero for supernatural terror. Sequels and reboots piled on, each more outlandish than the last, from ghostly babysitters to time-traveling priests. The real kicker: the actual house stayed stubbornly quiet. Subsequent owners reported nothing unusual, with one family living there peacefully for over 2 decades. So why does Amityville still grip us? Maybe it's the tantalizing blend of true crime and the occult, a rare collision of verifiable bloodshed and unprovable specters. Or perhaps it's the cautionary tale about how easily trauma can curdle into mythology, how a house's history can become a Rorschach test for our collective fears. The DeFeo murders were tragic enough without demonic embellishment, yet the Lutzes' story offered something darker, proof that sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster under the bed. It's the realization that the real horror might just be us, spinning nightmares out of thin air for a paycheck and a front-page headline. The Amityville saga endures not because it's true, but because it holds a funhouse mirror up to our own obsessions. It asks how much we're willing to believe and how desperately we crave stories that make the ordinary terrifying. The house still stands today, its iconic quarter-moon windows now a tourist photo op, its real history overshadowed by the ghosts we invented. And that's the twist. No Hollywood script could have written. The most haunting thing about Amityville was never inside its walls. It was in the audience, watching in the dark, wanting so badly to believe. Decades after the Lutz family fled, the Amityville house still draws paranormal investigators like moths to a flame, each eager to capture proof of the supernatural. Teams armed with thermal cameras, EVP recorders, and electromagnetic field detectors have crawled through every inch of the property, chasing whispers of the same phenomena the Lutzes described. Some claim to hear the phantom slamming of the infamous secret door, while others report sudden temperature drops in the basement where the DeFeo murders occurred. The most persistent legend, Jody the demonic pig, whose glowing red eyes allegedly peer through second-story windows at trespassers brave or foolish enough to linger after dark. Yet for all the high-tech gadgetry and dramatic YouTube videos, the evidence remains frustratingly ambiguous. Skeptics point out that nearly every proof of haunting has plausible explanations: creaking pipes for the knocking sounds, drafts for the cold spots, and the power of suggestion for those who feel an unseen presence. Even the house's current owners, who have lived there without incident since the 1990s, openly mock the haunting claims, offering tours with a wink and a reminder that the scariest thing about the property is its property taxes. That hasn't stopped the steady stream of thrill seekers. The house has become a macabre pilgrimage site, its iconic quarter-moon windows now a backdrop for countless selfies. Tour buses idle at the curb while guides spin exaggerated tales of levitating beds and walls oozing blood. Nearby shops sell Amityville horror t-shirts and Jody's Lair coffee mugs, turning tragedy into kitsch. The real estate listing from 2016, which cheekily mentioned the home's legendary past, only fueled the frenzy, drawing offers from paranormal enthusiasts willing to pay a premium for a piece of notoriety. What's fascinating isn't just the persistence of the myth, it's the way the house serves as a living Rorschach test. True believers see every flickering light as confirmation, while skeptics dismiss it as clever marketing. The line between history and hysteria has blurred so completely that even the original DeFeo murders, a verifiable tragedy, are often reduced to a footnote in the hauntings lore. Perhaps that's the real horror here, not ghosts, but our collective willingness to repackage suffering as entertainment, to turn a family's unimaginable loss into a carnival attraction. The Amityville house doesn't need demons to be disturbing. Its enduring legacy, a monument to our appetite for the spectral, is chilling enough on its own. And so the cycle continues. Every Halloween, new documentaries rehash the same stories, ghost hunters stage overnight stunts, and the debate rages on. The house, meanwhile, stands silent, its walls holding secrets we'll never truly know whether they're whispered by the dead or conjured by the living. One thing's certain, as long as we keep looking for monsters, Amityville will keep giving us exactly what we want. The question is, what does that say about us? The scream sliced through the cold Queen's night on March 13, 1964, a sound so raw, so desperate, it should have brought the entire neighborhood running. 28-year-old Kitty Genovese was just steps from her apartment door when Winston Mosley, a stranger with a knife, attacked her not once but 3 separate times over 30 agonizing minutes. By the time police arrived, she lay dying in the arms of a neighbor who'd finally ventured outside. But what turned this tragedy into a national firestorm wasn't just the brutality. It was the New York Times' explosive claim that 38 people had watched or heard the assault without calling for help. The story became a symbol of urban apathy, igniting debates about human nature that still rage today. Except the truth, as it often does, is far more complicated. While the Times report painted a picture of callous indifference, later investigations revealed glaring inaccuracies. Most witnesses didn't actually see the attack. They heard muffled screams and assumed it was a drunken quarrel or domestic dispute, common in the city's noisy streets. Some did intervene. One man shouted from his window, scaring mostly off temporarily. Another held Genovese as she took her last breaths, and several did call police, though the calls were mishandled by an overburdened precinct. The real scandal wasn't universal apathy, it was systemic failures, from media sensationalism to sluggish emergency responses, that let a narrative of collective guilt take root. Yet the myth of the 38 witnesses sparked something revolutionary in psychology. Researchers Bibb Latané and John Darley launched groundbreaking studies on the bystander effect, revealing how people in groups often hesitate to act, assuming someone else will take charge. Their experiments, like staged seizures in crowded rooms, proved the more witnesses present, the less likely any individual is to help. This wasn't about heartlessness, it was about diffusion of responsibility, a quirk of human psychology that the Genovese case threw into stark relief. Suddenly, cities implemented emergency hotlines, schools taught bystander intervention, and Good Samaritan laws shielded helpers from liability. Kitty's death, twisted by headlines, ironically made the world more alert to suffering. The legacy of that night is a paradox. The story we think we know of passive onlookers ignoring a woman's cries isn't entirely accurate, but the fear it exposed, the idea that civilization is just a thin veneer over chaos, tapped into something deeper. It reshaped how we understand responsibility, from courtrooms to classrooms, and perhaps that's why the Genovese case still haunts us, not because it revealed how cruel people could be, but because it forced us to ask how much cruelty we're willing to tolerate before we finally step into the light. The Kitty Genovese case became a lightning rod not because it was unique, but because it tore open uncomfortable truths about how society processes tragedy. While the myth of 38 silent witnesses crumbled under scrutiny, the fallout from those inaccurate headlines triggered seismic changes in emergency response systems across America. Before 1964, calling for help during a crisis was a disjointed affair. Different cities used various police department numbers, operators lacked standardized training, and jurisdictional confusion often delayed life-saving responses. But the public outrage over Genovese's death, fueled by the Times narrative of bystander indifference, became the catalyst for a revolution. By 1968, the first official 911 system launched in Haleyville, Alabama, a direct line to fire, medical, and police services designed to eliminate the chaos of decentralized reporting. What's often overlooked is how the case exposed cognitive biases lurking beneath our moral outrage. Psychologists later identified the Genovese syndrome, a phenomenon where the very presence of others can paralyze individual action. This wasn't just about apathy, it was about how urban anonymity distorts perception. Witnesses in densely populated areas often misinterpret emergencies as mundane noise, assuming someone more qualified will intervene. The case forced cities to confront this psychological blind spot, leading to public awareness campaigns like New York's See Something, Say Something initiative. Emergency dispatchers began training to distinguish between ambiguous calls and genuine distress signals, while courts re-evaluated legal definitions of negligence in group settings. Yet the most profound legacy lies in how the story's inaccuracies reshaped reality. Though the 38 witnesses' detail was exaggerated, the myth itself became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Studies show that people who'd heard the Genovese story were significantly more likely to intervene in crises, believing they were resisting the bystander effect. The narrative's power didn't depend on its truth, It depended on its usefulness as a cautionary tale. Today, when a stranger steps forward to shield someone from an attacker or a crowd films a crime instead of fleeing, we're seeing the paradoxical aftermath of that night in Queens. A story that began with misrepresentation ended up rewriting the social contract, proving that sometimes progress springs from our refusal to accept the version of ourselves we fear most. The tragedy's aftermath also birthed unexpected innovations. The 911 system's rollout included tone-activated dispatch systems to filter prank calls, GPS tracking for faster response times, and protocols for handling mental health crises, all indirectly tied to the scrutiny Genovese's case brought to emergency gaps. Even Good Samaritan laws protecting those who aid strangers from legal liability trace their urgency back to this moment. The real horror wasn't that 38 people failed Kitty, it's that we built a world where such failure was possible, then spent decades dismantling it brick by brick. And in that dismantling, her name became shorthand not for apathy, but for the systems we created to ensure no one would ever feel unheard again. Ted Kaczynski wasn't just a bomber, he was a paradox, a Harvard-educated mathematician who waged a one-man war against modern technology from a shack in the Montana wilderness. Between 1978 and 1995, he mailed or hand-delivered 16 bombs to universities, airlines, and tech executives, killing 3 people and injuring 23 more. Each device was meticulously crafted, its parts filed free of fingerprints and stamped with the initials FC, shorthand for Freedom Club, Kaczynski's imaginary revolutionary cell. But what set these attacks apart wasn't just their brutality, it was the manifesto that came with them. A 35,000-word screed titled Industrial Society and Its Future, penned by Kaczynski under the pseudonym The Unabomber, argued that technology was eroding human freedom and that only its violent destruction could restore humanity's natural state. The FBI's longest and costliest manhunt had found its philosopher-terrorist. Kaczynski's descent into extremism began far from the mountains in the sterile halls of academia. As a teenager, he'd been a math prodigy, skipping 2 grades before enrolling at Harvard at 16. But beneath his brilliance lurked a seething resentment. Decades later, revelations surfaced about his participation in a harrowing psychological experiment led by Professor Henry Murray during his time at Harvard. The study, designed to measure stress responses, subjected students to brutal verbal attacks while their physiological reactions were monitored. Some biographers argue this experience warped Kaczynski's already fragile psyche, feeding his paranoia and distrust of systems. After earning his PhD and briefly teaching at UC Berkeley, he abruptly retreated to a 10 by 12-foot cabin without electricity or running water where he honed his bombs and his ideology. The Unabomber's campaign might have continued indefinitely if not for an unlikely whistleblower, his own brother, David. Recognizing Ted's writing style in the manifesto, which the Washington Post published in 1995 under FBI pressure, David and his wife Linda connected the dots to Ted's obsessive letters ranting against industrialization. Their tip led agents to Lincoln, Montana, where they found Kaczynski's cabin stuffed with bomb-making materials, 40,000 handwritten journal pages, and a live explosive ready for mailing. The evidence was overwhelming, but the trial took a surreal turn when Kaczynski's lawyers attempted an insanity defense, a strategy he furiously rejected, insisting his actions were rational and justified. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty in 1998, receiving life without parole. What makes Kaczynski's case endure isn't just the violence, it's the unsettling relevance of his critique. Strip away the bloodshed, and his manifesto echoes modern anxieties about AI, surveillance capitalism, and environmental collapse. Tech luminaries like Bill Gates and Musk have even acknowledged with discomfort that some of his warnings about technology's dehumanizing effects weren't entirely wrong, just his methods. Yet this intellectualization risks sanitizing his crimes. However eloquent his writing, Kaczynski wasn't a misunderstood visionary. He was a murderer who targeted random secretaries and grad students, whose bombs maimed a computer store owner and blinded a Yale professor. His ideology wasn't freedom, it was nihilism dressed in academic jargon, a warped fantasy where progress deserved a body count. The Unabomber's legacy is a Rorschach test for how we confront extremism. Do we dismiss violent ideologues as mere madmen, or do we grapple with the uncomfortable slivers of truth they might twist into justification? Kaczynski's cabin now sits in an FBI museum, a relic of a man who thought he could bomb his way back to simplicity. But the questions he raised about autonomy, about the price of innovation, still linger like smoke after an explosion. And perhaps that's the most chilling part. In an age of algorithms and climate crises, it's harder than ever to wholly dismiss the fear behind his fury, even as we recoil from the hands that wielded it. Ted Kaczynski's violent isolation might have ended in a Montana prison cell, but his ideas distilled from ink and dynamite found unlikely disciples in the decades that followed. Eco-terrorist groups like the Earth Liberation Front and Animal Liberation Front adopted his rhetoric, swapping mailed bombs for arson attacks on ski resorts, lumber companies, and research labs. Their targets differed, but their core belief mirrored the Unabomber's manifesto. That industrial civilization was an existential threat requiring radical dismantling. The ELF's 1990s firebombing of a Colorado ski resort, which caused $12 million in damage, came with a communique straight out of Kaczynski's playbook. For the sake of the planet, for the sake of our children, we must fight back. The parallels were unnerving anonymous violence, moral certainty, and a refusal to distinguish between corporate executives and low-wage workers caught in the crossfire. Yet the most startling revival of Kaczynski's ideology emerged not from the fringes, but from Silicon Valley itself. Tech skeptics like former Facebook executive Chamath Palihapitiya and Twitter co-founder Evan Williams began vocally criticizing the platforms they helped build, warning of social media's corrosive effects on democracy and mental health. While they rejected violence, their critiques often echoed the Unabomber's warnings about technology's dehumanizing grip. Even famed computer scientist Jaron Lanier, a pioneer of virtual reality, penned books like 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now, a title that could have been ripped from Kaczynski's journals. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. The industries Kaczynski sought to destroy now housed executives who, in sanitized boardroom language, conceded he wasn't entirely wrong. This ideological seepage raises uncomfortable questions. When does legitimate criticism of technology's excesses veer into the paranoid absolutism that fueled Kaczynski's rampage? The Neo-Luddite movement, which advocates for slowing or reversing technological progress, walks this tightrope daily. Groups like the Dark Mountain Project publish manifestos about uncivilizing society, while off-grid communities experiment with pre-industrial living, all without picking up weapons. But the line blurs in online forums where frustrated individuals romanticize the Unabomber's prophetic insights, debating whether his methods were misguided but necessary. Reddit threads and niche podcasts dissect his writings with an intensity once reserved for religious texts, a phenomenon psychologists call radicalization through theory, where abstract ideas, stripped of their bloody consequences, gain cult-like appeal. The darkest legacy of Kaczynski's ideology, though, lies in its adaptability. White supremacists have twisted his anti-industrial arguments to fit their belief in an ethnically pure agrarian past, while militant environmentalists cite him to justify sabotaging pipelines. Even the conspiratorial QAnon movement, with its fear of a shadowy, deep state, borrows the Unabomber's lens of systemic corruption, though Kaczynski himself despised their mystical leanings. This ideological elasticity proves terrifyingly effective. Strip away the bombs, and you're left with a framework flexible enough to fit almost any grievance against modernity. Yet there's a crucial distinction between Kaczynski and those who quote him selectively. His victims weren't abstractions or systems. They were real people, an advertising executive opening a package, a graduate student checking her mailbox. The Unabomber's modern admirers often overlook this, treating his manifesto like a thought experiment rather than a justification for shattered lives. That's the danger of divorcing ideas from consequences, of mistaking a murderer's pen for a philosopher's. Kaczynski's cabin may be empty, but the shadows he cast still stretch across movements that preach destruction in the name of salvation. A reminder that the most seductive ideologies are often the ones that tell us it's noble to burn the world down. The Christmas lights still twinkled on the trees of Boulder, Colorado, when 6-year-old John Bennett Ramsey was reported missing on the morning of December 26, 1996. A ransom note, bizarrely long, detailed, and oddly specific, claimed she'd been taken by a small foreign faction, demanding $118,000, a sum eerily matching her father John's recent bonus. But within hours, the case took a gruesome turn. John Bennett's body was discovered in the basement of her family's Tudor home, a garrote twisted around her neck, her skull fractured, and duct tape covering her mouth. The scene was a forensic nightmare, contaminated by well-meaning friends and family who'd trampled through the house before police secured it. What followed wasn't just a murder investigation, it was a media hurricane that would rewrite America's obsession with true crime. That ransom note became the first red flag. Stretching nearly 3 pages, it was riddled with strange phrases: "Don't try to grow a brain," "victory," SBTC, and written on paper from inside the Ramsey home. Handwriting analysts pored over every loop, comparing it to samples from John Bennett's parents, John and Patsy. Some experts claimed Patsy's writing bore striking similarities, while others dismissed the analysis as inconclusive. Then there was the note's theatrical tone, borrowing lines from movies like Dirty Harry and Ransom, as if the kidnapper were performing rather than plotting. The demand for an oddly precise amount, combined with the fact John's bonus was publicly unknown, pointed uncomfortably close to home. The Ramsey family's behavior only fueled the fire. Instead of frantic grief, their initial interviews struck detectives as oddly composed. John's decision to find John Bennett's body in a previously searched basement, accompanied by a friend, not police, raised eyebrows. Patsy's tearful pleas on CNN, begging for the real killers to come forward, felt staged to critics. Even John Bennett's older brother, Burke, became a subject of speculation after child psychologists analyzed his detached demeanor in interviews. The district attorney's office leaned hard into the parents as suspects theory, convening a grand jury that ultimately stopped short of indicting them. Years later, DNA evidence would complicate things further. Traces of an unidentified male's genetic material on John Bennett's clothing suggested an intruder. But by then, the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. What transformed this tragedy into a cultural phenomenon wasn't just the mystery, it was the packaging. John Bennett's pageant photos, with their heavy makeup and flirtatious costumes, became tabloid fodder, dissected as proof of parental exploitation. The Ramseys' wealth and privilege turned the case into a referendum on class, with critics sneering at their ability to hire high-powered attorneys while ordinary families would have faced harsher scrutiny. Cable news ran wall-to-wall coverage, blending crime-solving with voyeurism, while talk show hosts debated every conceivable theory, from a pedophile ring to a staged kidnapping gone wrong. The case birthed a new genre of true crime entertainment, where tragedy was repackaged as a puzzle for armchair detectives to solve. Yet beneath the spectacle, the Ramsey case exposed deep flaws in how America investigates crimes and consumes them. Boulder PD's mishandling of the crime scene, their failure to isolate the family for questioning, and their reliance on leaks to the press set a template for how not to run a homicide investigation. Meanwhile, the public's hunger for salacious details blurred the line between justice and entertainment. turning a murdered child into a character in a national soap opera. Decades later, with no arrests and no clear answers, JonBenét's story remains frozen in time, a cautionary tale about what happens when grief becomes content and justice takes a backseat to intrigue. The real mystery isn't just who killed JonBenét Ramsey, it's why we still can't look away. JonBenét Ramsey's glittering pageant crowns and sequined costumes became shorthand for a cultural obsession that far outlasted her tragic death. The images of her performing coy routines in heavy makeup and miniature ball gowns didn't just haunt the news, they ignited a firestorm about childhood, exploitation, and the dark side of American pageantry. Tabloids splashed her photos under headlines screaming, "Little Girl Lost" and "Beauty Queen Murder," transforming a murder investigation into a moral panic about how far parents would go to live vicariously through their children. Critics seized on the footage of JonBenét batting her false eyelashes and swaying to suggestive music, arguing these contests sexualized little girls under the guise of talent. Psychologists appeared on talk shows debating whether the pressure to perform made her a target, while child advocates called for bans on children's beauty pageants altogether. The Ramseys' affluent lifestyle private planes, sprawling homes only deepened the scrutiny, framing JonBenét's story as a parable about privilege gone wrong. But the media frenzy revealed less about pageants than about America's own contradictions. The same outlets condemning child beauty queens simultaneously monetized JonBenét's image, rerunning her performances ad nauseum while editorializing about their impropriety. Reality shows like Toddlers and Tiaras later capitalized on the controversy, serving up train-wreck auditions of stage moms and tearful toddlers for public judgment. The line between outrage and entertainment blurred until it vanished entirely. Even now, when a child pageant makes headlines, JonBenét's ghost hovers over the debate, her face a Rorschach test for how we view innocence, ambition, and who gets to define it. Perhaps the most unsettling legacy lies in how her case reshaped true crime itself. Before JonBenét, crimes against children rarely dominated national headlines unless they involved mass tragedies or kidnappings. Her murder marked the moment cable news discovered the ratings gold in juxtaposing saccharine pageant tapes with grim police updates, creating a template that persists today. The saturation coverage birthed a new breed of armchair detective, with viewers dissecting every Ramsey interview for clues, as if solving a puzzle rather than grieving a life. Web sleuth forums spun wild theories, from secret pedophile rings to clandestine family cover-ups, while documentaries repackaged her story as a whodunit with cliffhangers. In death, JonBenét became both a victim and a commodity, her memory frozen in time, forever 6 years old in a tiara, caught between the spotlight she loved and the shadows it cast. The tragedy also exposed the hypocrisy of how society polices motherhood. Patsy Ramsey was crucified in the court of public opinion for forcing her daughter into pageants, while the fathers, often the ones footing the bill, faced far less scrutiny. The same culture that celebrated Shirley Temple's precocious charm in the 1930s now recoiled at JonBenét's performances, revealing how arbitrary the line between adorable and inappropriate really was. Decades later, the conversation continues to evolve. Modern pageants have rebranded, emphasizing natural beauty and talent over glitz, yet the specter of exploitation lingers. Meanwhile, true crime has begun reckoning with its own role in the circus, with newer documentaries focusing less on sensational theories and more on the forensics that might finally bring answers. JonBenét's story endures not just because it's unsolved, but because it holds up a mirror to our collective anxieties about childhood, about fame, about the lengths we'll go to package tragedy as entertainment. Her pageant smiles, frozen in VHS tapes, are a reminder that some legacies aren't about closure. They're about the uncomfortable questions we're still too hesitant to ask. The Boeing 727 roared through the stormy November sky over the Pacific Northwest, its passengers oblivious to the drama unfolding in the cabin. At the back of the plane, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses who'd purchased his one-way ticket under the name Dan Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. What she read turned her blood to ice. "I have a bomb, sit beside me." Thus began one of aviation's most audacious crimes, a skyjacking so flawlessly executed, its perpetrator vanished into legend. Cooper's demands were precise: $200,000 in cash, roughly $1.3 million today, 4 parachutes, and a refueling truck waiting in Seattle. Authorities complied, desperate to avoid catastrophe. Once the money was aboard and passengers were released, Cooper ordered the plane back into the sky, this time with just the crew and himself on board. Somewhere over the rugged forests of southern Washington, he lowered the rear staircase, strapped the cash to his body, and leapt into the stormy darkness. Neither he nor the money were ever seen again. The FBI's manhunt spanned decades, combing through every possible lead from the tie clip Cooper left on the plane to the faint fingerprints on his boarding pass. Suspects emerged like shadows: Richard McCoy, a Vietnam vet and skilled skydiver who pulled off a nearly identical heist just months later; Kenneth Christiansen, a Northwest Airlines employee with insider knowledge and unexplained wealth; and even a man named Dwayne Weber, who allegedly confessed on his deathbed with the cryptic words, "I am Dan Cooper." Yet none fit perfectly. McCoy was too young, Christiansen lacked the physical profile, and Weber's DNA didn't match traces from Cooper's tie. The case file swelled with over 1,000 potential suspects, each with tantalizing clues that ultimately led nowhere. Forensic breakthroughs only deepened the mystery. In 1980, a boy digging near the Columbia River uncovered rotting bundles of $20 bills, serial numbers matching the ransom money. The discovery suggested Cooper might not have survived his jump, yet no body was found. Then came the oddest twist. In 2016, after exhausting every lead, the FBI officially closed the investigation, citing the absence of new credible evidence. Some agents privately admitted defeat, conceding Cooper had either died that night or crafted the ultimate vanishing act. What makes the D.B. Cooper myth endure isn't just the audacity, it's the romance of the unknown. Was he a criminal mastermind or a doomed amateur swallowed by the wilderness? Did the money scatter in the wind, or did he spend it under a new identity? The case birthed a cottage industry of books, documentaries, and amateur sleuths still scouring the woods with metal detectors. Even the FBI's case files, now public, read like a thriller with the last page ripped out. Cooper's jump became a metaphor for escape, resonating with anyone who's dreamed of disappearing into the night. Perhaps the truth doesn't matter as much as the legend itself. In an age of surveillance and digital trails, Cooper's story feels like a relic, a reminder that once, however briefly, someone outsmarted the system so completely they left behind nothing but questions. The skyjacker's greatest trick wasn't stealing the money. It was ensuring no one could prove whether he won or lost. D.B. Cooper didn't just vanish into the night. He parachuted straight into the American imagination, becoming a folk hero for the disillusioned and a muse for storytellers. Within years of his skyjacking, the legend morphed from an FBI case file into a cultural touchstone, celebrated in songs, films, and even comic books. Country singer Tom T. Hall immortalized him in 1972's The Ballad of D.B. Cooper, painting the hijacker as a modern-day Jesse James, outsmarting the system with guts and guile. The song's refrain, "Ain't Nobody Knows Where Old D.B. Gone," captured the public's fascination with the ultimate underdog story, a lone wolf beating the odds, then disappearing without a trace. Hollywood couldn't resist the myth either. The 1981 film The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper recast the hijacker as a Vietnam vet-turned-antihero played by Treat Williams, fleeing both the law and a bumbling bounty hunter. Though the movie flopped, it cemented Cooper's reputation as a rebel icon, a symbol of resistance against faceless bureaucracy. Decades later, the Marvel series Loki winked at the legend, featuring a variant of the trickster god who name-drops Cooper as a kindred spirit in chaotic escapism. Even Prison Break and Justified dropped Cooper references, reinforcing his status as shorthand for the ultimate getaway. But why does this outlaw resonate so deeply? Part of it's the mystery, the tantalizing void where answers should be. In an era of surveillance and data trails, Cooper's story feels like the last great American vanishing act, a reminder that escape might still be possible. Yet there's also the romanticism of his crime, non-violent, victimless, and oddly courteous. Witnesses recalled Cooper ordering bourbon and soda, tipping his stewardess, and apologizing for the inconvenience. He wasn't a terrorist, he was a gentleman bandit, robbing not with a snarl but a smirk. The myth-making reached its peak in the Pacific Northwest, where Cooper's jump became local folklore. Every year on the anniversary of the hijacking, fans gather at Ariel, Washington's D.B. Cooper Days, toasting the skyjacker with themed cocktails and debating theories. The town's tavern displays a replica of the ransom cache, while enthusiasts comb nearby woods with metal detectors, hoping to unearth the truth. Some even argue Cooper's legacy is worth more than the stolen money, a testament to the enduring allure of the unconquered rogue. Yet beneath the celebration lies a darker question. What happens when we glamorize crime? For every admirer who sees Cooper as a folk hero, there's a critic pointing out he endangered lives and inspired copycats. The real D.B. Cooper, whoever he was, isn't a character in a heist movie. He's a man who left a trail of confusion, wasted resources, and an FBI file that will never fully close. The legend may sparkle, but the reality is messier, a reminder that even the slickest escapes cast long shadows. From Netflix documentaries to TikTok deep dives, Cooper's story keeps evolving, adapting to each generation's fantasies. Maybe that's the real magic trick. Decades after he leapt into darkness, D.B. Cooper still hasn't landed. He's forever suspended in that stormy sky, a riddle wrapped in a mystery, inviting us to keep looking up and wondering. Selena Quintanilla's voice was a force of nature, rich, warm, and brimming with a joy that transcended language barriers. By 1995, the Queen of Tejano music had shattered records, won a Grammy, and was on the brink of crossover superstardom, with dreams of acting and an English-language album in the works. But on March 31st, just 2 weeks before her 24th birthday, those dreams were cut short in a motel room in Corpus Christi, Texas. The woman who pulled the trigger wasn't a stranger or a stalker. She was Selena's most trusted confidante, the president of her fan club, Yolanda Saldivar. What began as a confrontation over embezzled funds ended with a single gunshot to Selena's back, severing an artery and leaving her to bleed out in the lobby of a Days Inn, cradled in the arms of the motel's owner as she whispered her final words, the phone number for the man who just betrayed her. The trial that followed was a media circus, broadcast live to millions and dissecting every gruesome detail. Saldivar, a 34-year-old nurse turned obsessive devotee, claimed the shooting was accidental, that she'd grabbed the gun in a panic during a struggle, intending to kill herself. Prosecutors painted a different picture, a calculating embezzler who'd siphoned over $30,000 from Selena's boutiques and, when cornered, chose murder over exposure. The evidence was damning. Witnesses testified Saldivar had purchased the gun days earlier, practicing at a shooting range. The motel clerk described hearing Selena scream, "No, Yolanda, no," before the fatal shot. And then there was Saldivar's own bizarre behavior, holding police at bay for 9 hours in her pickup truck, waving the blood-stained gun while sobbing and singing Selena's songs. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict her of first-degree murder, sentencing her to life in prison with parole eligibility after 30 years, a term she's still serving today. Yet Selena's death didn't silence her voice, it amplified it. In the weeks after the shooting, her music surged on the charts with "Dreaming of You," her posthumous English-language debut, becoming the first album by a Latin artist to top the Billboard 200. Suddenly, Tejano music wasn't just a regional genre, it was a global phenomenon with Selena as its radiant ambassador. Hollywood rushed to memorialize her, releasing the biopic Selena in 1997, starring a then-unknown Jennifer Lopez in the role that launched her career. The film, produced with the Quintanilla family's blessing, captured Selena's infectious energy, her playful charm, her boundary-breaking ambition, the way she twirled in sequined bustiers while belting rancheras with the power of a diva. Critics marveled at how someone so young could exude such star quality, both onstage and off. What makes Selena's legacy endure isn't just the tragedy, it's the cultural door she kicked open. At a time when Latinx artists struggled for mainstream recognition, she proved that talent and charisma had no language barriers. Her influence echoes in every genre blurring artist today, from Shakira's hip swiveling pop to Bad Bunny's reggaeton rebellion. Walk through any Tex-Mex neighborhood and you'll see her face immortalized on murals, her music drifting from car windows. Visit the Selena Museum in Corpus Christi, and you'll find her iconic outfits preserved behind glass, the red jumpsuit from her final concert still shimmering as if waiting for her return. The cruelest irony, Saldivar thought killing Selena would erase her. Instead, she made her immortal because true stars don't fade, they explode, scattering light across generations. And Selena's light, it's still shining. Selena's death didn't just leave a void, it ignited a cultural awakening, propelling Latino representation to heights the music industry had never seen before. In the months following her murder, her album sales skyrocketed, with Dreaming of You smashing records as the fastest-selling album by a female artist in history. Stores couldn't keep her CDs in stock, and radio stations that had once relegated Tejano music to niche time slots suddenly couldn't play her songs enough. But the impact went far beyond charts and sales. Selena's tragedy forced mainstream America to confront a truth it had long ignored. Latino artists weren't just a demographic, they were a powerhouse audience, hungry for voices that reflected their experiences. Record labels scrambled to sign Tejano acts, while networks like MTV and VH1, which had rarely featured Latin musicians, began carving out space for artists like Ricky Martin and Shakira. The so-called Latin explosion of the late 90s, it wasn't an accident. It was Selena's legacy blooming from the seeds she'd planted. Then came the biopic Selena, released in 1997, just 2 years after her death. The film wasn't just a memorial, it was a revelation, introducing her story to audiences who'd never heard her sing a note. Jennifer Lopez, then a relatively unknown dancer and actress, poured herself into the role, mastering Selena's signature hip swings and that megawatt smile. But the film's brilliance lay in how it celebrated her life rather than fetishized her death. Scenes of her performing in front of roaring crowds at the Houston Astrodome contrasted with intimate moments her giggle fits backstage, her nervous excitement about recording in English, her fierce loyalty to her family. Director Gregory Nava made a conscious choice. This wouldn't be a true crime story. It would be a love letter to ambition, to cultural pride, to the joy Selena radiated. And it worked. Critics raved, audiences wept, and Lopez's career catapulted overnight. To this day, the movie remains a touchstone, quoted in memes, referenced in tributes, and screened at fan gatherings where newcomers still discover Selena's magic. The ripple effects didn't stop there. Selena's influence seeped into fashion with her signature bustiers, cowboy boots, and bold red lips inspiring designers from the runways of Paris to the streets of East LA. Her ethos, mixing traditional Mexican fabrics with contemporary glamour, became a blueprint for artists like Beyoncé and Katy Perry, who cited her as a style icon. Even her business acumen left a mark. Before celebrity brands were commonplace, Selena had built an empire, boutiques, a perfume line, and plans for a Selena-themed theme park. In death, she became a case study in cross-cultural entrepreneurship, proving that authenticity could be profitable. But perhaps her most enduring legacy is the way she redefined what it meant to be both American and Mexican, refusing to choose between identities. She code-switched effortlessly, joking in Spanglish during interviews, flipping from rancheras to hip-hop covers onstage. In an era when assimilation was often framed as the price of success, Selena wore her roots proudly, and her fans loved her for it. Today, artists like Bad Bunny and Karol G cite her as the reason they sing in Spanish without apology, while activists point to her as proof that representation isn't just about visibility, it's about power. Walk through Corpus Christi today and you'll find her everywhere, in the Selena Museum where her custom-made outfits gleam under glass, in the Mirador de la Flor Memorial where fans leave flowers and handwritten notes, even in the murals stretching across buildings, her face forever young, forever smiling. The most haunting tribute, the annual Fiesta de la Flor festival, where thousands gather to dance to her music, a celebration that outlived her by decades. Selena's story didn't end in that motel lobby. It became something bigger, a reminder that artistry transcends borders, that joy can be an act of resistance, and that sometimes the brightest stars burn forever. From the blood-soaked floorboards of the Villisca Axe Murders to the glittering pageant crowns of John Benet Ramsey, these 33 crimes share a haunting common thread. They're not just about the acts themselves, but how they shattered our sense of safety and rewrote history in their wake. Each case is a mirror reflecting our darkest curiosities, where mystery collides with media frenzy and cultural obsession. Take the Black Dahlia, where Elizabeth Short's tragedy became tabloid fodder, or the Zodiac Killer, whose ciphers turned terror into a twisted game. These stories grip us because they blur the line between truth and legend, leaving questions that fester for decades. Media sensationalism amplified every gruesome detail, transforming victims into characters and killers into antiheroes. The Amityville haunting became a Hollywood franchise before the DeFeo family's blood had dried, while Ted Kaczynski's manifesto sparked debates far beyond his crimes. Even Selena's murder, a deeply personal tragedy, became a catalyst for Latino representation in music, a proof that these cases don't just end with verdicts or funerals. They ripple outward, reshaping laws, industries, and even how we see ourselves. What ties them together? The unresolved D.B. Cooper's parachute vanishing into the Pacific mist, the Tylenol killer's identity lost to time. These gaps in the story invite us to fill them with theories, art, and endless speculation. They challenge our faith in justice and our hunger for closure. Now we want to hear from you. Which case left you lying awake, turning over the pieces? Was it the calculated cruelty of H.H. Holmes' murder castle, or the eerie normalcy of the Sodder Children's disappearance? Drop your thoughts below, and if you're hooked on history's darkest corners, hit subscribe. Because the past isn't just prologue, it's a labyrinth of unsolved riddles, and we're just getting started.